Producer engineer Mark Howard got some rude awakenings when he went down south. He was young, maybe he was a little ignorant about the southern past, but if you're working with people who were there, you soon find out the history. The faux pas that he made, well, they were hard lessons to learn, but he got it. First, we're going to talk about working with Daniel Lanois, which led him right in the beginning of that relationship, working with the Neville Brothers and some southern history. I'm John Beaudin. This is Rock History Music. Hey, by the way, what was your first impression of Daniel Lanois? What was your first when you first met him? What would you think?
I thought he was a cool guy. He was kind of like he was a little eccentric, like he had long hair and he wore this bowler cap, and he just came out of working on U2's Joshua Tree, and so he came into Grand Avenue Studio after that to start his solo record. So there was another guy from Hamilton called Bill Dillon, who was a guitar player that Dan had used in the past. And so I was put on that session with Dan, and Dan would always be trying to like stump me, like, put my guitar on track 16 and get ready to record. I said, it's already plugged in and I got it on 16 already. He goes, how did you know that? I said, well, I heard you guys talking and I thought you probably want to do a guitar thing after talking about it. So go, And so he kept on trying to stump me and with all these other things. And so that just made him think, well, this kid's pretty handy. And so he invited me to come to New Orleans to help him with a band called the Neville Brothers, which I didn't know who the Neville Brothers was. And I was confused. I thought it was the Everly Brothers. I was telling all my friends, I'm going to make a record with the Everly Brothers. It ended up being the Neville Brothers. And it was only supposed to be for 6 months. And so I had to leave my job at Grand Avenue. And Bob Deutsch, who's the owner there, he says, if you leave, your job's not here when you come back. I said, I know, I'm going to take a chance. And so I flew to New Orleans. I met with Dan in the French Quarter, and he had this big apartment building he rented there. There was nothing in it but a bed. And so he said, look, I'm leaving for England in 2 days, and I'll give you some numbers. We need to find a place to make the record. We need to get all the gear in from Canada and England and the US. We're buying a console from Europe he'd already paid for. And we need to set it up find the location, set it up, and I'll be back in a month and we'll be ready to roll. And I'm 20 years old. I'd never done any of this before. And so there was no computers. Yeah, he gave me a couple of phone numbers of like Manny's Music in New York and places like that. And I had to bring the console in from England and find a way to import it without paying taxes. And so I found how to get around all that stuff. And then I shipped stuff from Canada down because Dan had like this 24-track Studer tape recorder just sitting in Hamilton. And so he said, well, get it down here. And so I had cases made at the Guitar Center, Guitar Clinic, where Lou. And so he made these cases and shipped them to me in New Orleans. And so I got them, and the tape recorder is the size of a refrigerator. And it was pretty crazy. And the console was 10 feet long and in a road case too, and came in from England. And so I rented this crazy apartment building in it's called the Garden District in New Orleans. And so I found this 5-story apartment building for sale. And so I had this real estate agent, David Zulkine. I said, well, make him an offer. If it's for sale, tell him we'll take it for 6 months and I'll pay all the money up front. And so he went to the guy and he said, yeah, sure, I'll take it. And so I paid him all the money. And it was like only $1,500 a month or something like that for a 5-story apartment building. And so it was pretty incredible that I got it. I showed pictures to Dan. He says, looks great, let's do it. But it was on the second floor where we were going to be working. And so I had to hire all these guys from the Jazz Fest, crew guys, to get the console. And because it had to go upstairs, it wouldn't fit in the elevator. So they had to jimmy it on its end and then kind of go around the corner, going up all these stairs. And so we had this rule: you'd lose a finger before you dropped it. So if you smash it on something, you couldn't drop it. Anyways, yeah, so that I ended up getting the whole thing up, set up, and then Dan came in and then we were preparing for the Neville Brothers Yellow Moon record. So it was pretty exciting.
What was your impression of them? And of course, you learned. I mean, you sound like a guy that you're pretty good on your feet. So what was your impression of them, and what were they like to work with?
I'd gone to a couple of shows to see what they were like live, and it's amazing live. Like it's funky. It's like they're the people that invented funk. Like the Meters, and Cyril and Art were in the Meters, and then you got Aaron Neville, who he sang "Tell It Like It Is" in the 1950s, and that was a big hit. Tell it like it is, like, he's got that beautiful
that vibrato, yeah,
vibrato in his voice, yeah. And so when I met them, they're hey motherfucker, would you? And like I couldn't understand them, like because I'm like, it's from, I don't understand Southern language, kind of their the way they talk, and so they go in the stove, close the door. Like all this kind of like lingo, and trying to figure out what they're talking about. And so working with them was kind of interesting. And Aaron would say, take me to first voice, the first voice. Okay, here's no, the first voice, the voice. Oh, what? This is the first voice he recorded. No, the first voice, first verse. But they say voice. It sounds like voice, but it's verse, So it took me a while to get the hang of their lingo and stuff like that. But
they know about Canada. Were they familiar? I mean, I hate to sound ignorant, but when they found out you were Canadian, did they have any stories about Canada or preconceived ideas? Or
well, Charles Neville was on tour in Canada, and some guy threw a joint into his sax bag. And he crossed the border and they found it. He spent 9 years in Angola prison for that. It was pretty heavy, so they knew Canada was like, tough on the on getting in and out. But I think that they knew that we were kind of green to what the Southern culture was. I made 2 records with the Neville Brothers, and on the second record, we made it in the French Quarter in this big, huge villa, kind of like mansion, I would say, more than villa. And so I had a bunch of motorcycles there, 10 Harley Davidsons in the garage. And so Cyril comes over and I go, Cyril, I want to show you all the bikes we got now, because I only had one bike when I made Yellow Moon. And so, and he liked bikes. And so I brought him in the garage, and I had like, the 1936 knucklehead, panheads, shovelhead, like the choice bikes of all periods, all stock, beautifully kept. And so I brought him in to show him all these bikes, and then he looks over through them all, and then he looks at the wall and he goes, "What's that on the wall?" I go, "It's the biker flag." He goes, "Take that down right now." I'm like, "Why?" He goes, "You don't know what that means?" I said, "No. It's the rebel flag." That's all I knew. I was like, I had no idea that what it meant stood for a black person, And so I take it off, throw it in the garbage can right in front of him, because I didn't learn any Southern history in Canada's.
We didn't.
We didn't. I was blind to it, and the racism, come from Hamilton. There was no racism back then, because there wasn't very many black people. There was only one black kid in my school,
When I heard you say that in an interview, I remember you mentioned the person too by name. For me, one Chinese person in Miramichi, Lucy.
Yeah. Lucy, yeah. Yeah. And same, one Indian girl in my grade 3rd class.
Moods guy. You create the mood around the house, around the room, around the town. You create it on record. I mean, it's like intrinsically, maybe when you were 19 and you started getting all, you got involved with Daniel Lanois, maybe you didn't know that, but looking back now, are you surprised you were able to to me, it's all these moods sonically and visually, and the book showed me that. By the way, great pictures, because I felt like a fly on the wall, and I know that you were probably trying to do that.
Yeah, it was all done by time lapse. But yeah, so it's like, I'm a drummer, and I was taking drum lessons when I was 14 or whatever, and so by time I was like 16 and stuff, I had taken over the basement and took the ping pong table, made a drum riser out of it. And I had like all these posters and all the cool shows that were going on around McMaster University in
Parents were
Hamilton.
okay with it?
Yeah. And so, my dad would come down sometimes. He goes, "What's that smell?" And I go, "Dad, they're smoking American cigarettes." "Oh, all right." He's English, real British. And so he knew it was pot, but he let us smoke it. And so it was cool. And so, yeah, we would just kind of have like, a cool kind of like parties and just all kinds of stuff happening down there. A lot of people sometimes. And so, yeah, it was like I brought in a couch and some rugs and, I was trying to, make the 60s vibe, like because I'd seen all these cool 60s shots and stuff like that. So I was always intrigued about that. And I'm also kind of I'm interested in architecture. I've always had some kind of knack. I really love, I remember finding a Playboy magazine and then looking at the Playboy mansion and the pool and all, like, that's where I want to go. It's because it's like amazing kind of architecture. And so since I was a kid, I've been doing this and not realizing it until now that I put this book out and it's like, holy shit, I started there out of the basement. And then, and then I got a job at Grant Avenue Studio in Hamilton, and that's where I met Daniel Lanois. So,
and there's a reason why people say, well, as that lady you talked to, she said, well, it changed the trajectory of your life. But it literally, and it sounds cliche, but I would have said the same thing. It's weird how things turn out. I mean, and then you got sick and it changed your attitude towards the world. But how do you look back at those two things? First of all, having that accident and then getting cancer and going through all these trials. I mean, and you're still here and there you are,
Yeah. So, yeah. The accident changed my, I was a live mixer, and then that changed that whole thing. And then I got the studio job. And then with the cancer, it changed the way I look at life and how I have to live every day to the fullest and just, give back. And I've been, I did a couple of concerts there in Toronto, one in Hamilton, and then the COVID thing hit and stalled all that till now. And so, so now I'm just kind of rebuilding and to put this book out while I was through COVID and all this stuff. And, the first book I wrote, Listen Up, about kind of behind the curtain of what went on all these records. So this new record, Recording Icons and Creative Spaces, is the sister to that book. So now you can get this one and see what I'm talking about, and see the pictures of what it really looked like, because it was on Listen Up, it was just little black and white photos in there. So this is a nice, beautiful book with color photos. And there's some photographers that contributed to it, but a lot of it is just time-lapse photography, me putting my camera on the speaker or on the console and just taking shots in the room, and nobody knows, and so that's how I got some beautiful shots of Tom Waits singing and Neil Young. And
Neil Young, those pictures, you feel those pictures. I felt that when I saw him, the close-ups,
Yeah, those ones were shot by Adam Volek, who was a video photographer guy that was hanging out at the studio. And so, so it was it's a beautiful match of all kinds of different photos over the last 30 years. So
who's the naked lady?
What's that?
Who's the naked lady?
That's my friend Renee, and she's a photographer, and she just loved my bike. And I said, will you take a picture naked on it? And she goes, yeah. And she just dropped her clothes off, and I just snapped a couple of shots. And
it's so natural in there. I mean, I looked at him going, that's so cool.
Yeah. So, you know how it goes. Just things just kind of happen.
When in Rome.
Yeah. When in Rome. Yeah, exactly.
Links to both of Mark Howard's books are in the description where you can pick them up. One is the storybook, basically telling the stories about working with all the greats: Neil Young, Joni Mitchell, Bob Dylan, Tom Waits, Tragically Hip, and so many more. So we'll have links to both books. Like I said, the first one's the storybook. The second one is basically the pictures book. We've showed you some pictures in the videos. Links to that and a lot more. If you want to help the channel, there are links. Subscribe. Check out our podcast. It's a fairly new podcast. It's doing really, really well, and you can hear a lot of our full interviews on our podcast. Share our videos and podcasts, and like, comment. We'd appreciate that. I'm John Beaudin. This is Rock History Music. Take care of yourself.